I never thought an animal could alter the shape of my life. Dogs, to me, had always existed on the edges of other people's stories. Faithful, obedient, useful, never something meant to fill a space inside a human heart. I believed I was too self-reliant for that, too anchored in logic and routine. But certainty has a way of unraveling when loneliness settles in quietly. When my husband surprised me with a German shepherd named Jack, I accepted him without excitement. I saw him as a precaution, not a companion. A body with sharp instincts, meant to stand guard while my life stood still. Rowan's career in international business kept him moving across borders and time zones. Weeks would pass with only brief calls and distant reassurances. I learned how to live around the absence. One untouched plate at dinner. One side of the bed forever cold. I stayed busy on purpose, filling every moment with tasks so I wouldn't have to sit with what I felt. "He'll keep you company," Rowan said, pressing the leash into my hand, smiling as though that solved everything. I smiled back, because it was easier than explaining the hollow feeling in my chest. At first, Jack remained distant. He didn't bark or demand affection. He observed. From doorways, corners, quiet spaces, his amber eyes followed me as if he were listening even when I said nothing. When I spoke aloud to myself, he stayed alert. When tears slipped out unexpectedly, he didn't retreat. He stayed. Little by little, I noticed him noticing me. The way he waited outside closed doors. The way he positioned himself near my feet while I worked late into the night. The way he lifted his head when my breathing changed. Without realizing it, I was being seen again. One evening, after a day that felt heavier than the rest, I sat on the edge of my bed and let the silence press in. Missing Rowan felt sharper, more physical. The house seemed smaller, colder. I whispered, "I'm fine," to no one at all. That's when I heard the quiet rhythm of paws against the floor. Jack nudged the door open and entered slowly, as if asking permission. His tail was low, his expression unreadable but gentle. Without hesitation, he climbed onto the bed and curled against my side. His warmth grounded me. My hand found his fur, tracing the steady proof of another living presence. Something inside me gave way, not in sorrow, but in release. For the first time in weeks, I breathed fully. In that wordless moment, I understood what I had been missing. Jack wasn't protection. He wasn't a responsibility. He was connection in its simplest form. Loyalty without expectation. Comfort without explanation. As the days passed, the bond deepened. Jack became the reason mornings felt lighter. The sound of his movement through the house. The way he nudged my hand when I drifted too far into thought. The quiet joy in his eyes when I laughed. Each moment stitched something broken back together. He taught me to pay attention, again. To the way sunlight spills across the floor. To rain tapping softly against glass. To the comfort of simply sharing space with another being. Love, I realized, doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it arrives quietly, sits beside you, and stays. I never expected the connection to grow this strong. At first, Jack was only a shadow that followed me room to room. But over time, the loneliness I had normalized began to loosen its grip. He always knew when the nights felt too long, when the house echoed too loudly with absence. He would rest his head near my hand, his calm presence anchoring me to the moment. There was something profoundly human in his understanding. Sometimes, in the dim quiet, I would whisper, "You always know when I need you, don't you?" He'd tilt his head slightly, tail brushing the floor in response, and in those moments, the silence no longer felt empty. It felt full. It was never about replacing Rowan. It was about learning how to exist in the space between goodbye and return. About finding connection where absence had left its mark. Love, I began to understand, rarely arrives as a grand declaration. It doesn't wait for perfect timing or dramatic moments. Sometimes it lives quietly, in steady presence, in loyalty that asks for nothing, in the soft rhythm of a heartbeat close enough to remind you that you're not alone. The night everything changed came without warning. A storm rolled in after midnight, sudden and violent. Wind rattled the walls. Thunder cracked so close it felt personal. The air hummed with electricity. I went to lock the back door, wanting one small sense of control, but the key refused to turn. No matter how much pressure I applied, it wouldn't move. Rain slammed against the glass. My chest tightened. The house felt exposed, fragile, alone. What if someone gets in? I whispered, the thought spiraling faster than I could stop it. That's when I felt it, a gentle nudge against my hand. Jack stood beside me, body still, eyes focused. He wasn't barking. He wasn't panicked. He was aware. Steady. Without urgency, he stepped toward the kitchen, pausing only once to look back and make sure I followed. Then he stopped at a drawer and pawed at it. Once, twice, and waited. Confused, I opened it. Beneath old papers and forgotten reminders of another life lay a spare key. I stared at it, breath caught somewhere between disbelief and relief. I had forgotten it entirely. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock. It turned easily, the door secured with a quiet click that seemed to echo through the storm like a release. When I turned back, Jack was sitting calmly, tail moving in a slow, steady rhythm. Not triumphant, not expectant, just present, as if to say, "You're safe now." Something shifted inside me then. Gratitude, awe, a quiet realization that this wasn't instinct alone. This wasn't training. This was connection. That night, I sat on the floor beside him for the first time. Jack lowered his head onto my lap, eyes heavy, trusting. His warmth spread through me like sunlight after rain. And for the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel empty. After that, I couldn't see him the same way. Jack wasn't just guarding the house. He was protecting me, in ways I didn't know I needed. He sensed things before I did. The way he positioned himself between me and the door when someone unfamiliar passed by. The way he pressed his nose into my palm when my thoughts grew restless. The way he stayed close when silence lingered too long. Days folded into weeks. I started talking to him, not commands, not routine words, but real conversations. At first, they were harmless observations, the weather, the garden after rain. But slowly, those turned into confessions. Things I had never voiced, fears I kept buried, hopes I wasn't sure I was allowed to have. Jack listened without interruption, eyes steady, ears twitching slightly, as if every word mattered. And maybe they did. Not because he understood language, but because he understood me. In those moments, something became clear. Sometimes the love that saves us doesn't arrive the way we expect. It doesn't wear a familiar face or speak in reassuring sentences. Sometimes it has 4 legs, a steady heartbeat, and a gaze that looks straight through the walls we build around ourselves. "You're always watching me, aren't you?" I said once, smiling softly as I scratched behind his ears. The words felt lighter when I said them, but the truth beneath them was heavy. Because he was watching. Quietly, patiently, as if he saw the things I avoided admitting even to myself. At first, I spoke just to fill the silence, but eventually, I spoke because I needed to be heard. My fears spilled out in fragments, the thoughts that kept me awake long after the house fell silent. Jack never judged, never interrupted. He simply stayed. And somehow, that was enough. I used to believe love had to announce itself. Grand gestures, promises spoken aloud, moments impossible to miss. But Jack taught me something quieter, something truer. That love could be still, that it could exist without words, that sometimes love is nothing more than choosing not to leave. I didn't understand it then, but Jack wasn't just easing the silence. He was preparing me for what I couldn't yet imagine. Time moved on. Rowan's trips stretched longer. His calls grew shorter, distracted, hurried. I told myself it was work, that it was all for us. But a part of me understood the truth before I was ready to admit it. The distance between us was no longer measured in miles. So it became Jack and me. Two lives sharing a quiet house that no longer felt like home. His steady presence kept the walls from closing in. His breathing became the rhythm that carried me through sleepless nights. Then, one evening, something changed. I had just returned from the market when I noticed it, a black sedan, parked across the street, engine idling softly. I might have dismissed it if I hadn't recognized it. Same car, same spot. The night before. A chill traced its way up my spine. I hurried inside and locked the door. Jack was already alert. His ears lifted, eyes sharp as they flicked toward the window. He felt my unease instantly, pressing his head against my leg in quiet reassurance. "I'm here." I told myself I was imagining things, but the next morning, the car was there again. And the morning after that. Always parked, always watching. The sound that woke me that night is something I will never forget. Gravel crunching beneath my bedroom window. I froze. For a heartbeat, I convinced myself it was a dream. Then came the rustling, slow, deliberate, intentional. Someone was outside. I reached for my phone, but before my fingers could close around it, Jack was already moving. He positioned himself between me and the window, body rigid, muscles taut. A low growl vibrated from his chest, deep, unmistakable. A warning. Then he barked. The sound was sharp, commanding, cutting through the darkness. Whoever stood outside froze. I heard a gasp, followed by hurried footsteps retreating down the driveway. Jack barked again, louder this time, his stance unyielding. When I finally gathered the courage to look outside, the street was empty. The car was gone. The fear remained. I didn't sleep that night. Jack stayed pressed against me as the wind howled beyond the walls. Each crack of thunder pulled his gaze back toward the window, scanning shadows I couldn't bring myself to look at. My hand rested on his back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the only thing keeping me anchored. The next morning, I called Rowan. My voice shook as I told him everything. He sounded concerned, but distant. "Maybe it's nothing," he said. "Try not to worry. I'll come home soon." Even as he spoke, I knew he wouldn't. Not in time. Something shifted inside me that day, a realization I couldn't ignore anymore. I couldn't keep waiting for someone else to protect me. I had to learn how to do it myself. So I started paying attention, really paying attention. Jack and I created a routine. Every evening, we walked the perimeter of the house together. I reinforced the locks, installed new lights, set up cameras. Jack always moved slightly ahead, his focus sharp, his movements deliberate. He wasn't just my dog anymore. He was my partner, my guardian. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, I wondered what would have happened that night, what might have been lost if he hadn't been there. Then one evening, everything shifted. Jack and I were returning from our usual walk when I noticed a man standing at the far end of the street. Tall, lean, a dark jacket zipped high against his throat. His hands were buried in his pockets, his posture loose, too loose, as if he had nowhere to be and all the time in the world. Something about him felt wrong. He lingered without purpose, his gaze unfocused, and yet somehow fixed on everything at once. A chill ran through me, sharp and immediate. Before I could react, Jack felt it too. A low warning rumbled deep in his chest. The man turned slightly at the sound, not startled, not curious. He simply stepped backward, melting into the shadows until the darkness swallowed him whole. I didn't slow down. Jack pressed close against my leg as we hurried home, every instinct screaming the same thing. Get inside. That night, I checked every lock, every window, twice. Jack refused to settle. He paced near the front door, ears twitching at the smallest sound. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, the residue of fear clinging too tightly. But deep down, I knew better. The next day, I saw him again. This time, he wasn't hiding. He stood in broad daylight, laughing easily as he spoke with the neighbors. His smile was warm, approachable, harmless. I froze on my porch, watching as he chatted with Mr. Halden next door like they were old friends. Then he looked up. Our eyes met. A slow, polite smile crossed his face. He lifted a hand in greeting. My stomach twisted. "That's Ethan," Mrs. Breen called as she passed by. "New guy on the block? Joined the neighborhood security committee. Nice fella." Security committee. The words landed like ice in my veins. Jack stiffened beside me, his gaze locked on Ethan, a low growl vibrating through his frame. I forced a nod, retreated inside, and locked the door with shaking hands. He wasn't just a neighbor. He was the man from the shadows. That night, sleep never came. Every sound felt amplified, the creak of the floor, the whisper of wind against glass. Jack paced relentlessly near the door. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard it. The soft click of the backyard gate unlatching. My heart slammed against my ribs. Jack's head snapped up, his growl deep and immediate. I reached for my phone, fingers trembling, but before I could dial, something heavy struck the back door. Once, twice, then it burst open. Ethan stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his jacket, breath uneven, eyes dark with something unmasked. "I knew you'd be alone," he said calmly. "You never leave, always waiting, so vulnerable." "Get out," I screamed, stumbling backward. He smiled, a slow, chilling curve of his mouth. "Shh, no one's coming." He lunged. Jack hit him before I could move, a blur of muscle and fury. He clamped onto Ethan's arm and dragged him backward with terrifying force. Ethan shouted, struggling, but Jack didn't release. His growls filled the house, raw and violent. Then I saw it. A flash of silver. A knife. "No!" I screamed.